In late 1960s Los Angeles, jobs were vanishing, schools were underfunded, and the promise of civil rights was already fading. On these streets, protection wasn't guaranteed. You had to build it yourself. Out of this void, a teenager named Raymond Washington began pulling neighborhood kids together. His vision was unity, strength, and survival. That crew would evolve into the Crips. Soon after, another young man, Stanley "Tookie" Williams, joined forces with Washington, and their blue flag became a symbol that spread like wildfire through South Central. But power invites enemies. By the early 1970s, smaller gangs under attack by the Crips needed their own shield. From Compton's Peru Street Boys, led by Sylvester Scott and Benson Owens, a new alliance was born: the Bloods. Their answer to blue was red, and a war of identity began. What started as neighborhood protection exploded into one of the most notorious rivalries in American history. They weren't born into war, but war found them anyway. On the streets of Los Angeles, a stolen glance could start a firefight. A color, a hand sign, a name could mark your life or end it. Out of poverty, broken promises, and the silence of those in power came two forces that reshaped neighborhoods across America. This is the story of the Bloods and the Crips, how they formed, how they grew, and the long shadow they cast. Welcome to Gangster Chronicles. We don't just tell stories, we pull you inside them. If you're new here, subscribe now. What you're about to hear is not just history, it's survival. In a single decade, a neighborhood rivalry became a national network. From South Central corners to cities across the United States, the Crips and Bloods didn't just spread, they adapted, franchised, and survived. How did loosely connected crews become sprawling, multi-generational movements? The answer is not in one shootout, one leader, or one policy. It's in a story of economy, identity, prisons, music, and people who had no other options. To understand the Crips and the Bloods, you first have to understand the soil they grew from: deindustrialization, white flight, and a promise of equality that never arrived. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, black neighborhoods in Los Angeles faced unemployment, aggressive policing, and broken institutions. Youths on certain corners wanted protection, identity, and respect. In that space, neighborhood crews formed, informal, local, and protective at first. These groups were a mix: veterans returning from war, displaced youths, and organizers who sometimes tried to do good. But identity turned to territory, and territory carried consequences. The Crips began as one of many crews, but they expanded through affiliation. A persuasive leader here, a strong clique there. And before long, smaller crews pledged allegiance and wore blue as a sign of unity. That simple symbol unified fractured groups and let them operate at larger scale. Expansion happened on two fronts: recruitment on the streets and influence inside institutions, including later prisons. The Crips structure remained decentralized. Sets and cliques, each with its own leadership but all overlapping in identity. Decentralization was both a strength and a weakness: flexible growth, but frequent internal violence when leaders clashed. As the group grew, so did its stakes. And the stakes attracted money, weapons, and enemies. The Bloods formed in reaction. Facing the rising Crip influence across streets, several independent gangs and neighborhoods banded together for mutual protection. Red, already used in some communities as a marker, became their unifying color. But the Bloods were never a single organization either. Like the Crips, they were a collection of sets, fluid alliances that formed out of necessity. Their formation was less a strategic plan and more a survival response. When you're outgunned or outnumbered, you ally. This reactive origin shaped much of the dynamic between the two groups: escalation, tit-for-tat reprisals, and a culture of reputation that made retreat hard. The 1980s changed everything. The arrival of crack cocaine as a street-level high-profit commodity turned neighborhood turf into valuable property. Where once a corner meant social control, it now also meant cash flow. That cash funded recruitment, guns, and a hardened business mindset. Turf became investment. Corners were guarded not only for safety but for revenue. That economic shift converted loosely affiliated crews into entities with something to lose and something to fight for. When money is at stake, organizations centralize resources, form alliances, and sometimes professionalize. That's how local crews began to act like enterprises, and how violence escalated. Prisons became an unexpected growth engine. Mass incarceration policies in the 80s and 90s filled cells with people from the same neighborhoods. That concentration allowed networks to solidify, alliances to be forged, and rivalries to be negotiated behind bars. In many prisons, sets from the streets became more organized and learned to operate across distances. Sentences didn't stop identity. They often magnified it. When men returned home, they came back with new ties, new skills, and sometimes new missions. How did a Los Angeles rivalry go national? There are several channels. First, migration. Families and members moved for jobs, housing, or to escape conflict, but they took affiliations with them. Second, the prison network. Incarcerated members were transferred across states, essentially exporting said identity. Third, the drug economy spread demand, and wherever there was profit, organization followed. The result, sets with local names and identities carrying Crip and Blood affiliation popped up in cities across the country, sometimes in entirely different demographic landscapes. In some places, affiliation overlapped with local groups. In others, it created new tensions. In cities where there were existing turf disputes, the arrival of a set with LA ties often intensified violence, or in other cases, local crews adopted colors and signs to associate themselves with a larger identity. The expansion wasn't uniform. Some sets remained hyper-local, some grew into larger criminal organizations, and some faded. But the brand, the imagery of red and blue, had become an American symbol for a particular kind of street power and pain. Music and media transformed the rivalry into a cultural export. Rap artists from gang-influenced neighborhoods brought street narratives into popular culture. News and movies simplified and sensationalized the conflict. The net effect: identity was both amplified and distorted. For some youths, this visibility was a perverse recruitment tool. Image and persona replaced neighborhood loyalty. For others, it was a mirror. The world was now aware, and often uninterested, in the context. Cultural fame did two things. It memorialized certain actions and personalities, and it made the street cred economy global. That made the stakes higher, and the cost deeper. Both movements were never monolithic. They were collections of sets with shifting alliances. Power vacuums sparked internal violence as successors competed. Betrayals, real or rumored, sparked reprisal cycles. That internal friction often proved as deadly as external rivalry. Add law enforcement pressure and you have fractured leadership and splinter groups that acted unpredictably. The constant churn of leaders in and out of prison destabilized continuity, making long-term peace harder than a single truce could solve. Not every response was punitive. Across LA and beyond, community organizations, clergy, and former members led intervention programs focused on jobs, counseling, and conflict mediation. Programs using credible messengers, people with lived experience on the streets, proved effective in de-escalating violence. Education, employment, and mental health support attacked the root drivers of recruitment, hopelessness, and trauma. Those interventions didn't erase pain overnight, but they saved lives. They also showed a critical truth: enforcement alone cannot fix problems rooted in inequality. Today, the Bloods and Crips exist in altered forms. Some sets are smaller, some have corporate-style criminal operations, and some are phantom affiliations used for reputation rather than structured enterprise. Social media changed recruitment and reputation management. Online videos and messages can recruit, brag, or threaten, but they also create new opportunities for intervention and exposure. The groups that survive are those that adapted, to prisons, to online culture, and to new markets. The ones that collapsed often did so because of policing, prosecution, or loss of community support. They were called criminals. They were called monsters. But the fuller truth is harder to say. They were people shaped by a system that narrowed their choices. The Bloods and Crips are a story of identity, economy, survival, and failure, a mirror of the cities that raised them. If this chapter moved you, subscribe to Gangster Chronicles. We bring the full picture, the history, the human cost, and the lessons left behind. Subscribe now, share the truth. Help the conversation move from fear to solutions.